welcoming you onto the field here in Palo Alto at Stanford Stadium. Brenden Slaughter alongside Brian Rathbone and Josh Worden. This is the OMN post-game show. Oregon State falling to Stanford today. It was a grit and grind kind of a matchup today, very physical. Tough game for Oregon State to lose. They needed this game to stay within bowl eligibility. That falls out of the window today. Brian, we'll get your quick thoughts and we'll move over to Josh. What kind of stood out to you in this game?
Well, after especially after last week, where it looked like the offense took a step forward in terms of balance, they took a step back, or I wouldn't even call it a step back. They went against a really good Stanford defense and came up short. Only had 8 first downs, only scored 15 points, and Stanford held the ball for twice as long as Oregon State did, and Oregon State's defense I think really kind of like bowed up and answered the call. Even though McCaffrey ran for so many yards, I think they did a really good job of containing him in a sense, despite, Stanford's offense being on the field for nearly half the game.
I think that's a very fair point, Brian. I think you touched on a lot of things that I'm sure Josh probably wanted to touch on as well. But now we'll turn over to Josh Worden. Josh did color today for KBVR. You got a chance to kind of analyze the game. What did you kind of see from your kind of bird's eye view perspective in this game? And you mentioned a lot of things like time of possession and whatnot. What kind of sticks out to you? And can Oregon State draw any positives from this game?
I think the biggest positive and negative both lies in the passing game, both in Oregon State's passing offense and passing defense. Start with the passing defense. Oregon State looked really strong. Stanford had 60 passing yards today. Keller Chris, their quarterback, had more rushing yards than passing yards. So Oregon State has played solidly all season long, a few exceptions, but for the most part, Treston Deku and the rest of the secondary has been outstanding. Passing offense, however, still inconsistent. It's understandable Marcus McMaryion is making his 4th career start. There are reasons for that. But Oregon State still has not really been able to be efficient. And outside of that 75-yard touchdown pass to Victor Bolden, and that accounted for like 50% of their passing yards today. Overall, though, Oregon State has consistently been competitive in Pac-12 games. That's something that we couldn't necessarily say about this team last year at this point, and so I think there's growth. They're 7-2 against the spread. They've been competitive. I see them winning at least one more game the rest of the season, if not multiple. So I think there are positives. I think possibly the passing game is the biggest thing and a lot of penalties, but I don't think this game is a complete waste. They lost the game, but there were a lot of positives.
You hit it right on the button. At this point last year, Oregon State was going through a 41-0 loss to UCLA last year. They weren't competitive at all. Got blown out by Washington at home. There were just games late in the year in November that Oregon State just wasn't in. And so far this year, outside of a Colorado and a Washington game, Colorado and Washington both really good opponents, there hasn't been a game where you're like, wow, this team just got, beat from point A to point B and just beat down. So again, there's some tough things, but now looking ahead to UCLA next week and then after that to, and for the rest of the season, what do you kind of see, Brian, as the team goes forward? UCLA, up and down season this year. Oregon State might be catching them at the right time, though.
Absolutely, because, Josh Rosen looks like he's done for the year. So they're going to be playing with their backup quarterback, and UCLA just hasn't been a team that's, put a good defensive game and a good offensive game together. It's either their defense looks good or their offense looks good. It's never both. And so I think that's a team that Oregon State can probably jump on in LA.
Yeah, Josh, you mentioned it correctly. Last time Oregon State was in LA, got a big win against UCLA back in Jim Moore's first year down there, and Oregon State actually won that game, and it was in that 2012 season. Haven't been back because of the conference scheduling. But looking ahead now, UCLA again, Mike Fafal and replacement Josh Rosen had his good moment. They racked up a ton of points against Utah, good offense. But then they go last the other night and put up just very few. I think it was 10 against Colorado. Is it kind of like Oregon State where they're struggling to put together a whole game top to bottom?
I think to a certain degree. The biggest thing for UCLA is that they don't have a player named Christian McCaffrey. So Oregon State doesn't have to worry about that next week. And I think Oregon State at times played very solid run defense today. McCaffrey still had good numbers. But from UCLA's perspective, I agree with you. I think Oregon State's going to come in and give them a run for their money and cause some problems next week in Los Angeles.
I think it is big because, hey, Christian McCaffrey was a Heisman Trophy candidate last year. Still, he didn't lose his ability. He was a little hurt this year, and Stanford's been a little down, but he's still a tremendous athlete. So OMN will be taking a break from game day coverage next week as the Beavers travel to UCLA. Be a nice time for Oregon State to go back on the road. Then we come back. OMN will have coverage of the Oregon State-Arizona game. That will be Dad's Weekend with time to be announced. Make sure to tune in to KBVR FM for that game as well, and check out OrangeMediaNetwork.com for the rest of the coverage on that as well. And also check out Orange Media Network for up-to-date practice reports and everything else concerning Oregon State. So for Brian Rathbone and Josh Worden, I'm Brenden Slaughter signing off from Palo Alto. Thanks for watching.